Welcome to Fairy Tale Access, where the head fairy's quest is to prove that fairy tales do exist in actual time rather than once upon a time. Together, we will unravel the heroes, young and old, who turn dreams into reality. These are the people who still believe in happily ever after. The discoveries will bend even our most cynical non-believers into believing in fairy tales. Good morning. Welcome to Fairy Tale Access. Today we have Tahani Nelson, the author of The Last Faoii.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So this was a military fantasy, and it was a little bit of a breakaway from everything we've ever known about military fantasy. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
I personally have always loved reading, but classic fantasy hasn't always been kind to women. And I wanted to create all the women that young me looked for. So I created a matriarchal society and women wearing armor and leading battles and forging their own destinies. And that's what I wanted. And I was so glad that I could finally do that with the Faoii Chronicles.
So what drew you to the military aspect? Do you have a military background? Were you ever in the military?
I am not in the military. I did a lot of research about ancient militaries, especially in college, and that's what really drew this to me.
What did you graduate with in college?
An English education degree for secondary education.
Excellent.
The military aspect was something that just interested me as a side project.
Well, the language, the way that you constructed the story was exceptionally well done. So now that makes sense. But so the breakaway was that this whole military, it was more from the women's side, how women survived, war and fighting, but they were more part of the war than is typically shown.
I did want to focus on matriarchal societies. I've read a lot of books before with lots of awesome men, and then women are always like the damsels in distress or the secondary character, and I wanted to bring them to the focus. So I created an entire matriarchal society for them.
So what were the elements that were important? Because there were times when they showed the influence of drugs and the damage to society. There was, whores versus agreement, and that whole power of consent was really strong throughout. Can you tell me about that?
The taniquillin is a item or a kind of drug that can offer a lot of power, but it's so easy to get addicted to. And once it's in your mind, you can't ever escape it. And I wanted to show that there are better ways to get to your goals. So the taniquillin follows through the entire Chronicles. And once people use it, they can't ever escape it again. And it's really sad in a lot of ways. So I wanted to show that there are better ways to reach your goals. Consent is also very important to me. I wanted the women to be empowered, especially in roles that they're not normally empowered.
Okay, and realizing the limits and lackings in your own community and what is really justice. Was there anything that influenced you in writing that portion?
There really has been, especially in the second and third books as well. I see a lot of people that are struggling to fight the battles of their parents. I see a lot of people that are trying to make a difference in the world and just feel lost. So I wanted to be able to give that power. I wanted to be able to give that empowerment and show them that they can be more than what their parents thought they could be. So in the first book, we have a battle. The entire thing is about a war. And then the second and third book show the aftermath of that, the people that have to survive in the world after the war is over.
That was a good ending, too. I can't say too much about it because it'll give it away. So let's go to your appearance today. Why do you wear war paint and dress up for interviews and conventions. Tell us about
I
that.
do I do wear armor and war paint to all of my interviews and readings and conventions and everything like that. There's a lot of people that really enjoy fantasy, but are afraid to go up to a booth without knowing about it full of ahead of time. So wearing armor, it brings them to me, and we're able to start a conversation even if they have no idea about my books. And everybody watching today, even if you don't pick up the Faoii Chronicles immediately, you're going to remember you saw me today.
We'll definitely remember that. So, do the markings mean anything?
They're based off of the Alothi who show up in the second book. They are highly influenced by Norse and Celtic culture in our world, but they are not historically accurate to that.
And why was justice a big theme throughout the story and the plot?
Justice is always going to be the ideal that I think that fantasy aims for. Justice is such an amazing thing, and every culture has an idea of justice, and it might be a little bit different from culture to culture, but that's like the center of society is justice. And you can tell so many stories about justice and never really encapsulate it. I wanted to explore that in different societies.
All right. Now you have this formidable woman's army. Why did you twist music into that? Or where did you get the influence of music being a part of war?
I love music, and I think a lot of people do, but the idea that music comes from the soul and the thing that connects with people across the world, like music is a universal language. And I wanted to tie that into deeper parts of society. Because this is a war society, the music became a war instrument. But as the society grows, music becomes something beautiful rather than just destructive. And because it's so universal, I wanted to explore that.
And what did you use from the Celtic warriors, the history of Celtic warriors, to develop the story?
The Alothi in particular were based off of Boudica myths because an amazing female warrior from history, their use of war paint rather than just music to weave magic was a great thing to try. And I've always really just been interested in Celtic history and mythology.
And is it Kaya? K-A,
Kaya.
Kaya. Okay, so you really, poor Kaya has gone through hell in this book. She's
Oh, I
alone.
know.
She has no family that she knows of. And then she loses everything and everybody in one battle.
Right at the
So,
beginning.
right. And it was the beginning of an end. But why was it important for that character to suffer so much and show how she moved forward?
Poor Kaya grew up in this order that she doesn't know anything outside of the monastery. And I wanted to show that there's a bigger world outside of it, and she would have never explored it if she wasn't forced to leave. And throughout the course of the book, she learns more about the history and she learns more about the real world. And she realizes that she didn't know everything she thought she did. And she would have never seen the truth if she hadn't been forced to leave in the beginning. It also gave her motivation to meet and trust other people that she wouldn't have done otherwise, which is a huge part of the book when she becomes friends and allies with people that originally she wouldn't have.
So, what about the whole blacksmith portion that showed up and the way that they design weaponry? Where did you study or pick up more information about that in your research?
I have been studying how to forge armor and arms for my entire life. It's been one of my favorite things to explore. While I personally don't have a forge, I've been studying it for so long that I really wanted to be able to show that in the story. And it's just one of those things that interests me, but you never really get to see women in the field. And so I wanted to make sure that my matriarchal society had that as well.
And what other type of cultures and ancient history have you looked into to help complete this story? Because it seems to be a mix. It does have a lot of Celtic. it seems to hold its own as far as how they reacted to things, how they participated. It was a really good side of women in war.
I think the main three would be the Greeks, especially with Athena, the goddess of war, the Norse with Freya, again, the goddess of war and love, and then the Celts with Boudica. And then Grecians also have the Amazon Society, which is like our classic female warrior society. And I think that might have been one of the first things that it excited me about the idea. The Norse have the Valkyrie, which is another thing that fierce women in mythology. And between all of these things together, I thought I was able to create one realistic society that pulled from more than one place.
It was realistic, especially the one of the battles that they're in where they, lose a lot of people, but they had a huge, was it a castle that they were all, hiding in? And
It was a warehouse, but you can turn anything into a battlement if you need to. And that was very difficult for them because they hadn't ever lost before. And I think that was important to show as well that loss is an important part of war, because otherwise it's not a war and you can't just have victories.
right. And what about moving forward on your own after those losses? How are you able to weave that into the story so well and make it so you made it more appealable to, young people and adults? So I want to understand how you did that.
I think I just created all the people that young me looked for and then continue to create the people that older me looked for. And I'm really just glad that I wasn't the only person looking for them. So it was really nice to be able to make new characters that different ages can relate to.
Were there any characters that you related to more than another?
I really relate to all of my characters, although the main character in the third book, I think that I relate to her most because she just wants to find who she is. And all the other characters really kind of have an idea from birth, and she's just trying to figure herself out. And when you are trying to figure yourself out and then are thrown into something that's way bigger than you, I think we've all been there. And I really enjoyed meeting that character.
So give us a little background on, is it 3 books in the series or are there more?
There are 3 books in the series, and then there's a supplemental anthology that my fans asked me to make. They requested different short stories, and I put them all together as a gift. But the 3 novels are the main ones.
Wow. Have you worked on any other series?
Nope, this is the first and so far only series, but I just finished the last novel earlier this year. So I'm taking a break, and I'm really excited to try new things. I can't wait to see what else I can create.
That's great. So are you a teacher of English now?
Yes, I teach high school English.
High school English. Have any of your students read the books?
A few of them have. I've never told them about it because I like to keep my personal life and my teaching life separate. But kids know how to get on social media. They can find me and then they just read them. But I'm also glad that I'm able to provide that as well. I'm able to teach them and give them something that's entertaining.
That's true. It's definitely entertaining. What was some of the feedback from your students? Were they really surprised? Like, wow, I didn't know you had it in you because, you're a teacher all day and appropriate and proper.
Most of them were surprised that I wrote a fantasy novel that doesn't have dragons. Because they all know that I love dragons, but I didn't put any fantastical creatures in this book because I wanted to focus on humans. So they're really asking that eventually I write a dragon book, and I probably will for them.
And what type of literature have you introduced to them in school?
We read a lot of the classics. I do really enjoy teaching Beowulf to my older kids because it's the oldest book we have in what is now English, and it's a book with a dragon. I like showing them the beginning and then letting them work their way up to the future. And it's just neat. But I really love Fahrenheit 451. To Kill a Mockingbird is one of my favorites to teach. My apologies. I love it so much. There's so many amazing books out there. And just being able to spark that excitement to read is so much fun for high school.
Well, what happens in a class with To Kill a Mockingbird? What are some of the conversations that you find coming up?
I think one of my favorite parts of To Kill a Mockingbird is when people see how different people can react to the same society. And the idea of looking past your experiences and trying to see from somebody else's point of view is such a central theme that a lot of people know about, but they haven't been able to put into words. So having Atticus Finch say that the best way to know somebody's story is to put on their skin and walk around in it is really, really great for a lot of students to be able to say that. And to be able to learn from Atticus Finch, who is one of the best literary characters in history.
So, what kind of conversations do you have with these young people about that book?
We talk a lot about how much society has changed. We talk a lot about how you can't judge anybody from the outside. You really have to get to know them. And how sometimes justice isn't what we expect. And no matter how terrible things can, we still have the ability in ourselves to try to make a better world. Like, it's not only our ability to make a better world, but it's something we have to do. And that really is something important, I think, for high school, because they want to make a difference, but they don't know how, and they don't think they're allowed to. It's one of the things I try to teach my high school students is that it's not only that you're allowed to, it's your duty to make a better world.
And what kind of skills do they think they need versus what you may have had to correct?
I think that every student thinks that they can just go out into the world and dismantle a society brick by brick, but they don't have the tools for that. You need to be able to speak eloquently. You need to be able to explain yourself in words that people that you don't necessarily talk to every day, especially older people, that you can discuss with them one-to-one. Code switching is something we talk about a lot. You talk differently to your friends than you do to your elders. And so you need to learn how to express yourself well, even if the words you want to say are not the ones that you normally would. So kids, when they're angry, they tend to curse. And they're like, you can't do that if you really want to explain yourself. Let's learn better vocabulary so that people will hear you and respect what you're saying.
Good point. But you can see how a lot of that plays into your series. So, can you tell us a little bit about books 1, 2, and 3?
Sure. Book 1 is about the Godfell War. It's Kaya finding out about her older and the history of the Faoii and making huge decisions to make the world better for the future generations. And then the second book is the next generation of Faoii. It follows the war, and then you get to see the children that had to grow up in the aftermath of the war they never picked, and then having to find their way in the world that was torn up by somebody that by their parents. And then the third book, we finally get to see everything culminate into the society they all were working for. So in all 3 books, you see people trying to make the world better, but from very different cultures.
That sounds great. Okay. And when you wrote the books, what was your original intent in writing them?
Originally, I just wrote them for me. I had a dream one night about what is now the first 3 chapters of the last Faoii, and I wrote them all down, and then I just kept writing after that. But the more I wrote, the more I was like, I feel like other people would want these characters as well. I can't be the only young woman that wanted stronger role models when I was small. So I started putting them out, and people responded really well. I built an entire army around this Faoii Chronicles, and it's been wonderful.
What's some advice that you give young people in writing?
I think the best advice I know how to give is don't compare yourself to any of the other writers you see on social media. There will always be somebody who is making more royalties or who has more books out or who writes more each night. The best thing you can do is just compare yourself to the writer you were a year ago. Because otherwise, if you keep comparing yourself, you're just going to lose hope. There's so many people out there, and you're looking at their highlight reels and your blooper reels, and it's just so hard. So just compare yourself to who you were and keep going.
What are some important questions that you ask your students on any assignment? Is there anything that you continuously ask on almost every book that you assign them to read during the school year?
We talk a lot about what does this mean to you specifically? There's a lot of things that I can say as your teacher, but if it doesn't relate to you, you're not going to remember it. So what are the things about the characters that you like or you don't like? What are the things about the story that make you angry or that make you joyous? Like what sets your soul on fire? And that's how I help them to connect literature, is because I want them to know that everything can connect to their life if they're able to look through that lens.
Do any of them have a problem with literacy in general where they're just not interested in reading? And if they do, how do you work around that? How do you get them interested in their assignments?
I try to pick books that they can tell that I'm also excited about. I always tell them at the beginning of a book that if you're not excited, it's okay because I'm excited enough for all of us. And that like enthusiasm kind of gets to them as well. And then it's hard not to be excited when the person in front of you is jumping up and down. I also use a lot of audiobooks because sometimes you just can't connect with the paper in the same way. And I like to be able to show them, like, I don't care how you learn, use whatever tools are available. You live in the world where it has more tools than anybody else before you has ever had. So I want them to be able to use whatever they have. So we use audiobooks a lot, and that really connects. And that's been really nice. I'm glad I'm able to offer that.
I find that's true. I think children learn differently. Some can, look at something that's written before them while others really need to listen to it. It's just a different learning style.
Yeah, and we all get the words into our brain, whether you listen or read it. So whatever works best for you. I don't know why there's so much elitism based around, I read actual books, I read ebooks, I read audiobooks. They're all reading.
And what's the one thing that you wanted people to take away from the series once you decided to publish?
I wanted people to feel empowered, especially people that haven't always felt empowered before. I wanted to focus on all of the role models that a lot of people don't have. We've got lots and lots of books that all kind of look the same, but I wanted to be able to provide something brand new, or at least not as common. So matriarchal societies and normally oppressed groups being in charge of entire civilizations. It's just nice to see something different.
So for Halloween or yesterday, did you go into school dressed the way you are today?
Yes.
You did?
I don't really wear the makeup as much when I go in, but my kids have seen me wear armor on many occasions.
They've seen you in the armor?
Yes.
What did they
Especially like when
say?
you start Beowulf and things like that.
Well, that must make you more relatable to them.
I hope so. If nothing else, I think that we learn better from people we see as people. And I want them to know, like, I'm as excited as I can possibly be to teach you. And if I can do something to make you excited as well, then I'm going to do it. And a lot of them just think it's really neat.
Well, that's true. They'll either think you're crazy and they'll want to do well.
They might think I'm crazy, but they'll also remember that day. And that's
Definitely.
better than forgetting.
Yeah, I don't think they'll forget you. You really seem to have a love of literacy, and you wrote an exceptionally great story that really shows women the power of consent, And that was really strong throughout. I was really impressed with that aspect of it, being aware of those around you and understanding that bad things happen, people die, but life goes on. And you have to keep moving forward.
And that's the biggest thing, is continuously moving forward and trying to make it so the people that come after you don't struggle the way you did.
Right. And that it's okay to make mistakes.
It
That
is
was a
okay to
good
make
point.
mistakes.
How long did it take you to write?
The first book took me like 5 years,
Five
and then the
years.
second book took me 2 years, and the third book took me 18 months. So I'm getting better.
Definitely. And did you have an editor work with you, or did you do all the editing yourself?
I don't edit my own work. My brain knows what's supposed to be there. It doesn't often see what is there. So I always hire a colleague, and I always pass it out to beta readers, and I get as many eyes on it as possible because I want to make sure that it's clean and good.
Well, as an English teacher, it has to be good.
Oh yeah, I couldn't. If my students came up and they pointed out a spelling error, I'd lose everything.
I know. It was so well written. There were no spelling errors that I found, and that's something I look for. The grammar was really good in the way that you constructed sentences and brought out an idea and drove the story.
I do write differently for books than I do for like an essay, and I do try to teach my students code switching. The idea that maybe you can use a sentence fragment if it's important, but don't do that in your essays.
Right. That's great. Well, thank you for sharing so much about how you created this story.
Thank you for having me here. It's been wonderful.
Oh, my pleasure. Until next time, keep asking questions. And if you want a book that'll keep you up long into the evening, The Last Faoii is the book to get.